On my left, Anas Al-Tikriti, who's one of the directors of Islam Expo. He's also CND and other anti-war organisations have worked very closely with Anas over the past few years, organising the major demonstrations against the attack on Iraq. I was also very pleased and privileged to work with Anas around the time that Norman Kember was kidnapped in Iraq, and I'd like to pay tribute to Anas's outstanding work there in working for the release of Norman Kember and the other people who were kidnapped there. So, first of all, a big welcome to Anas Al-Tikriti.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of our Lord Almighty, the most gracious, the most merciful. Kate, it's always a pleasure working with you too. And brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen and friends, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's great to be talking from this platform, and I sincerely hope that you are enjoying yourselves here at Islam Expo, and I hope that you will enjoy the few hours remaining of this event, and hopefully after this we'll decide whether we make it something that happens every year. I hope that we do. Now, I'm also pleased because we're here to talk about an issue that is close to my heart, and I'm pretty sure all of our hearts. Iraq in 2006, 3.5 years almost, after a war which we were told was fought in order to rid the regime of its weapons of mass destruction, in order to stop the sectarian kind of violence that the government back then was fanning and was promoting and was pushing, to neutralize the potential threats of Iraq to its neighbors, to bring at long last, democracy, freedom, dignity, humanity to the Iraqi people, to capture those that led or organized the attacks on New York and Washington on the 11th of September 2001, to break the backbone of the Taliban, which we were told was linked from the joint with Saddam Hussein and his government, and in order also to establish everlasting peace finally in the Middle East, and paving the way towards a resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. 3.5 years on, the picture is this. More than 200,000 Iraqis, and I don't care what Tony Blair thinks, more than 200,000 Iraqis killed. A sectarian war in all but name. In fact, a civil war in all but name, being promoted by the very troops that have the military power and have final veto on what happens and doesn't in a country that is now under occupation, full occupation. A country that had the basic installations and facilities of a state in terms of hospitals, roads, clinics, schools, factories, government authorities, buildings and the such, now with nothing whatsoever. I assure you, I've seen it for myself. A country that we heard time and again that we went to war in order to rid of the rule of a tyrant is now ruled by 1,000 tyrants and some. A country in which people lived in intimidation and apprehension and fear from one brutal ruler, now live in fear, intimidation, apprehension and horror from more than 250,000 individuals in military garb, roaming the streets freely, governing their country, raiding people's homes, breaking down their doors, capturing their loved ones, raping their women, killing their children. whether we like it or not, the issue of Palestine is further away from being resolved than it ever was. The weapons of mass destruction were never found, were never captured, they were never ever there. Now, and whilst Iraq, even under the regime of Saddam Hussein, never was any Iraqi implicated or charged or suspected of being part of any act of terrorism anywhere around the world, ever, ever. A country which never in its history had experienced booby-trapped cars, suicide bombings, or the such, now we are told by the Prime Minister, is the front line of the war on terror. Now, every single organization, some of well-known names, some of names that we have never ever heard before, now take base in Iraq. Now Iraq has become possibly a trigger for an all-out regional war, especially with the prospect of a war on Iran. My brothers and sisters, 3.5 years on, is it not time that we said loudly and clearly that whatever the project in Iraq, whatever the agenda in Iraq, that it has failed, and that the only way to rectify the situation is for us here in Britain to stop meddling in that country and with the affairs of the people, and to play a role in stopping the Americans and any other country in meddling in the affairs of that country and the world. It is time for us to recognize, as a shopkeeper would recognize at the end of the day or the week or the month, having calculated profits and losses, whether to go on or to change strategy. Is it not time 3.5 years on to say that that venture has been a calamity, has been a disaster, and it has been an immoral, unjust, illegal and unethical venture that now the hands of our country has been stained with? It is time that we said that. Iraq, my brothers and sisters, is a country that every single day descends into further chaos and further crisis. Every single day. Someone before the seminar came...
Please, ladies and gentlemen.
This is not part of my presentation,
please. Will be closing in 15 minutes' time. The Palace Restaurant.
Someone came and asked me before the seminar about why it was that Iraqi was fighting Iraqi, that Sunnis were fighting Shias. Why is that? And I say, as an Iraqi, I say that you would seldom find a family or a tribe or a clan throughout Iraq that does not consist of Sunni, Shia, Arab and Kurd and many others that make up the shape of Iraqi society. We do not have segregated lines. We do not have barriers and bars. We do not have fences and walls separating Iraqi from Iraqi. We have been living with each other for thousands of years, for hundreds of years. We have been living with each other side by side. We did not need Tony Blair or George Bush to send hundreds of thousands of troops, ill-equipped, ill-trained, young, gung-ho, trigger-happy personnel over to Iraq in order to teach us, the country and the people that created the first seeds of civilization of humanity, to teach us how to live side by side. We did not need that. The reality is, 3 years on, that we have a remnants of a country that once thrived. We have a remnants of a people that once clinged on to some hope. We have the rubble to say that there was once here a nation and a civilization. But in real terms, we have an area, a region, a people, a culture and a civilization that we have destructed, we have killed, we have obliterated. That is the legacy that will be left with this particular venture. And it is time, and I'm pretty sure that my co-panelists will address this further, it is time now that we as a people, regardless of our religion, our ethnicity, our ideologies, our backgrounds and our cultures, to stand up side by side and demand that this stops, and it stops now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anas. Our next speaker is going to give us an inside view on life in Iraq. Please welcome Haifa Zangana, an Iraqi author and activist.
On March the 11th, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, troops, US troops, attacked Abir's Qasim Hamza house. They raided her house. The house is near a checkpoint, American checkpoint. And while raiding the house with all the force possible, we don't know the exact number of the US troops, but some people, eyewitnesses telling us, they were more than 10 soldiers who raided the house. They raped Abir, who was 15 years old. They tried to cover up their crime by burning her body, and then they shot her father, Qasim Hamza, her mother, Khairiyeh, and her little sister, Hadil, who was 9 years old. Furthermore, when they left the place, the American spokesman, in his official statement, which was also enforced by the Iraqi policemen, they stated that Iraqi Arab Sunnis, terrorists, attacked the house and burned the girl and killed her family. Because that's what they do, the Sunni terrorists in the area. Forgetting in their haste that the family and the girl herself was a Sunni. So there was no reason, there was no logic for the whole crime. But this is what we are partly witnessing in Iraq, is the building up of a sectarian divide which never been exist before. But under occupation, it's not just the abuses of women, it's not just the rape of Abir Qasim Hamza, it's not just the detention centers and the missings of our loved ones. We do not know even exactly what figures we are talking about because it varies from one day to another, it varies from one source to another, but it is between 30,000 to 100,000 are under the US control in various detention centers. But also what we are reduced to as citizens to the basic level of the triangle of needs, and that is just to survive. We are reduced just to defend our daily survival, whether men, women, or children. Under occupation, the physical survival for us is we can be really risking our lives just moving outside the house, and that could be kidnapping, mortar attacks, it could be shooting by the Americans because they have the freedom of roaming the streets. It could be by gangs, militias, death squads, by the way, and the militias in Iraq being trained by the British and the American soldiers very heavily into human rights. They've been given courses by human rights because after all, I mean, part of the logic of the invasion was to teach Iraqis the respect of human rights. I'll show you, this is 3 pages, because the last 2 days we spent listening on the radio and watching on television is the anniversary of the suicide bombers in London, where people were killed. I'll show you, this is 3 pages of Iraqis, names and ages, killed on the 3rd of March. This is one typical example in a catalog of murders and bloodshed, including in this, most of them are children and women, and including families, 15 members of family of Razzaq al-Kadhim al-Khafaji by rocket from Apache helicopter. Apache helicopters not owned by the Iraqi resistance, not owned by terrorists, it's owned by the American troops specifically. depleted uranium being used against Iraqi people. All banned weapons, you name it, they used it in Iraq. In fact, they are experimenting on new kinds of weapons, and that's including a new form of napalm, the AK-77, which they used in Fallujah. And that is so flammable that it melts the bodies of our kids, our children. So they are experimenting on. If we move into education system in a dire state in Iraq, 50% of our girls, they stopped completely attending schools. This is a country which used to be one of the best we had the best education system in the whole Middle East. In fact, the number of women engineers in Iraq used to be exactly the total of all women engineers in the rest of the Arabic countries. Now we are confined to our houses for the fear of our lives, for the fear of our loved ones. We cannot. Under occupation, 4,000 university members of staff were sacked in university under the program de-Ba'athification. And also, we witnessed the looting of universities, the burning of university, and turning universities, the university buildings being turned into headquarters and bases for the Americans and the political parties working for them, the collaborators also. So it is a very competitive area nowadays. So illiteracy is on the rise. Academics, scientists, and teachers are kidnapped and killed. The rest are fleeing the country. 80% of our schools after liberation are not fit to receive students. In case of we looking at the aspect, the health, and I'm still talking about survival, because survival means your life, your education, and your health. These are the basic human rights we're dealing with. More than 90% of pregnant women in Iraq suffer from anemia because of malnutrition, lack of medicine and medical supplies. Acute malnutrition among children has doubled since occupation. And thousands of tons, we know about depleted uranium used. So the increase in cancer among children and women is horrendous. At least there are 6,000 Iraqis are currently on the Iraqi Ministry of Health list awaiting life-saving treatments. Most of them are children injured by bomb explosions or mines, or those who have medical conditions. Iraqi hospitals are unable to treat due to lack of staff, equipment, or medicine. Most of our consultants and doctors are leaving the country, fleeing the country. The fear of kidnapping, killing, threatening. So most of the specialized people, academics, scientists, consultants, they are fleeing the country. Those are, by the way, the same people who they were adamant not to leave the country under Saddam's regime despite all the oppression, because they thought, especially within the 13 years of sanctions, that no way we are going to leave our people. We differentiate between a dictatorship and the people. Now the whole picture is so muddled up, every single person is thinking. I think it's not just, we have to not fragment issues. We must not be really saying we defend women issues, we defend widows issues, we defend this or that, and start gathering few pounds here and few pounds there and to support NGOs working here or there. Don't do that. The main issue is to get rid of the occupation forces in Iraq, because Iraq is occupied. And the occupation, whoever tells you Iraq is sovereign, there are elections, 12 million Iraqis went to elections, and they are writing constitution. Do not believe that. Iraq is occupied as long as there are troops in the streets. And as long as the troops enjoying immunity, and the troops, the troops, mercenaries, contractors, diplomats, the security forces, all these people in Iraq, and they enjoy immunity from international and Iraqi civil and criminal law. As long as we have those, we have no sovereignty whatsoever. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Haifa. Our next speaker is Lindsay German. Lindsay is convener of the Stop the War Coalition, which I'm sure you're all very aware of the role that the Stop the War Coalition has played.
Thank you very much, and I'd like first of all to congratulate the organisers of this marvellous event. Because we have a conference ourselves this weekend in central London, I've only been here on Thursday afternoon and this afternoon, but both times it's been a really good experience and it looks as though people have had a fantastic weekend. So I think it's a very important development in terms of politics in this country. I want to bring greetings from the Stop the War Coalition to this meeting and to this event. And I want to perhaps go back to where we all came in, because it's nearly 5 years ago now that the events of 9/11 led to the terrible war on terror, which George Bush initiated, backed up by Tony Blair. He's now renamed the war the Long War, which I suppose has the benefit of being an accurate description of what we're now in. That they told us the war in Afghanistan was over in November 2001. They told us the war in Iraq was over more than 3 years ago when George Bush declared mission accomplished as he flew onto the aircraft carrier just off the coast of California. And they've told us that they were going to bring peace and justice to the Palestinians. Now, all of this would be a sick joke if it weren't for the hundreds of thousands of people who've died as a result of their policies and who continue to die. And I'm sorry, I'm very, very happy to have a 2-minute silence for the people who died in the London bombing last year. But that just over 50 people is what happens in Iraq practically every day. In Afghanistan, 6 British soldiers have been killed in the last 3 weeks, and that toll is going to rise. But 600 Afghans were killed in 4 weeks over May and June. Such a level that even the puppet president of Afghanistan had to complain to the British and the Americans. So let's remember what they are doing in those countries. Let's remember the double standards, which says that a British or an American life is worth more than an Iraqi or a Palestinian or an Afghan life. And let's remember that we said to them when we started this great movement of ours nearly 5 years ago, and the first demonstration over Afghanistan, you could have heard speeches. There were 100,000 people there. The first big Muslim mobilisation for a demonstration alongside non-Muslims that has taken place in this country. You could have heard speeches there from people who are in this room and other people as well, Yvonne Ridley, people like that, who said nearly 5 years ago exactly what would happen. That we wouldn't solve the Palestine question, that we wouldn't end terrorism, that we wouldn't bring peace and democracy to the Middle East. And all of these things have come to pass. And it seems to me that we now have a terrible situation. Haifa and Anas have referred to the situation, and they know much better than me from direct experience, the situation that the Iraqis face. But let's remember what our troops are doing there. You know, when you hear people say they have to stay there to finish the job, they're not doing a job there. They're not helping children go to school. They're not building electricity plants. They're not rebuilding roads. They're not building towns. They are an occupying force. And an occupying force has to oppress the people that it is occupying. And if you look at the terrible case that Haifa gave at the beginning of the young girl who was raped and then her and her family were murdered by supposedly American troops. And they say that the man they've now arrested in America had a personality disorder. It's not a personality disorder, it's an occupation disorder. And as long as we continue to occupy the country... And I must just say one thing about that case. That event happened in March. It was only in June that an American soldier came forward and said what had happened, 3 months later. And they said for 3 months this had nothing to do with the occupiers. It was sectarian violence between the Shia and the Sunni. How many more cases of death and rape and violence are being put down to sectarian violence when they're actually the act of occupying troops? Because this is what occupying soldiers do. They do it in the way that the imperialists have always occupied and ruled the countries that they believe they have a right to control. And therefore I think our main message when we talk about 3 years on from Iraq has to be that we want to get the troops out. We want the troops out of Afghanistan and we want the troops out of Iraq as well. That is the first lesson. The second one is, I think, a very important one, because it isn't just what they're doing to the Iraqis and the Afghans and the Palestinians. It's what they're doing to us here as well. And if you look at what they've done, again, nearly 5 years ago, when we set up the Stop the War Coalition, we had one slogan, Stop the War. And somebody came to our first conference and they said, no, we should add 2 more slogans, which we did. Against racism, which we believe would rise as a result of this war on terror, and in defence of civil liberties. Because we knew that the same people who lied to us about Iraq, lied to us about the threat of terrorism, lied to us by saying that it is Muslims who have to sort out their own house. Or Tony Blair, who this week said, and no doubt you've discussed this weekend, but who said the grievances that the Muslims have against the West are false. They are not false. It is not false to believe. It is not false to believe that there should be justice for the Palestinians and there can be no justice when Israeli tanks are on the borders and are killing them day by day, as they are doing at the moment in the most hideous breach of international law, which yet again is ignored by the Americans and the Europeans. It is not false to believe that what they are doing and have done to the Iraqis is a war crime. These are perfectly true perceptions of what is happening, and they are not just held by Muslims in this country and around the world. They are the view of the majority of people in this country who believe the war was wrong, who believe the troops should leave, and who believe that it is wrong that Tony Blair should scapegoat any section of the community because of the war crimes that he has committed. And that is why we also have to campaign over civil liberties. The attacks on civil liberties lies very hard on the Muslim community, particularly the young people in the Muslim community. There are signs up on the London Tube saying you have to expect to be stopped and searched. Well, I travel on the London Tube every day and I've never been stopped and searched. Now we know why that is. The Metropolitan Police said we're not looking for little old white ladies. Now, with the exception of the old, I fill the bill in that respect. What they're looking for is people of another colour skin, people who they think are Muslims, although we know they're not very good at telling the difference because they shot a Brazilian last year thinking and they are particularly criminalising this part of the community. But it isn't just the Muslims. They are at the sharp end of it, but it's also Brian Hoare, who has a protest in Parliament Square. One man who protests and is told he has to end his protest. The people who aren't allowed to read the names of the dead outside Downing Street. All of these people are people who are victims of this war on terror. We have to stand together. I have to conclude now, but I'll just say, please, whatever you do, keep campaigning and keep organising. And on September the 23rd, we are organising a mass demonstration. The Labour Party and Tony Blair are going to be in Manchester for the Labour Party conference. We are going to get tens of thousands of people in Manchester to tell Tony Blair exactly what we think of him and his war and the attacks on civil liberties. Make sure you're there.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Our next speaker is the Respect MP for Bethnal Green and Bow and an outstanding anti-war activist. Please welcome George Galloway.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Chair, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, wassalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. Evidence of the parallel universe in which British government ministers live was indeed the statement made by the Prime Minister in the House of Commons last week that Muslims have, and I quote, a completely, he was sure about the word completely, a completely false sense of grievance. The fact that he believes that, and we must assume that he does, because he wouldn't lie to Parliament, would he? is evidence of the other world in which these people live. A completely false sense of grievance is what the British Muslims are suffering from, a kind of delusion. This could only come from a man who didn't see the 250 machine gun toting policemen dressed in black, their faces covered with masks, who burst through the door of not one but two Muslim households in Forest Gate a couple of years ago. It could only come from someone unaware of the fact that almost 1,000 Muslims have been arrested under the so-called anti-terrorism laws. Since 9/11, only 27 of whom have been convicted of any crime, most of them not of terrorism. It could only have come from someone unaware that in the last 18 months there has been an 800% increase in the number of stop and search operations conducted by the British police against Muslims in Britain, mainly against young Muslim males. It could only have come from someone who didn't see the television pictures of the family in Gaza on the beach picnicking, who were ripped apart in seconds by an Israeli shell fired from a gunboat off the occupied territory of Gaza. Could not have heard the cries of the little girl of that family, caught live on TV as she wandered amongst the pieces, the limbs of her mother and her father and her brothers and her sister, wailing, disorientated, not knowing where to turn. It can only have come from a Prime Minister who's not aware that the very aeroplanes which killed another Palestinian girl yesterday, aged 6, that the avionics of the F-16, which was terror bombing the Palestinian refugees just yesterday, were built in Britain and sold by the British government to the government of Ariel Sharon and Ehud Olmert. Completely false sense of grievance. Such words could only have come from a British Prime Minister unaware of the fact that, as Lindsay German said, every day in Afghanistan, every day in Palestine, every day in Iraq, hundreds of people are being killed or maimed or wounded or their lives destroyed by a British, American, Israeli axis of evil. That's the real axis of evil in the world today. In the Sunday Times this morning, that organ of truth, owned by that paragon of virtue, Rupert Murdoch, this Islam Expo is attacked and Anas Al-Takriti singled out by name for attack. They don't like it, you see, that there are still some Muslims, not all unfortunately, who have not been terrorized into submission, who are not prepared to lock themselves away, who are not prepared to be silent about the suffering of Muslims in Britain and abroad. They don't like it that there are some Muslims who have the sense to know that the way forward is to link arms with those non-Muslims who think like them. They don't like the fact, Michael Portillo particularly didn't like the fact, that Anas Al-Takriti said here that we will not put up with our government committing these crimes in our name. Exactly what, said Portillo, did Mr. Al-Takriti mean when he said, we will not put up with? Well, we intend to show them what we mean. On the 23rd of September, every single person in this room, and their husband, and their wife, and their children, and their neighbours, and their friends, and their co-religionists,
must, and I repeat, must be in Manchester on September the 23rd under the slogan, Time to Go. It's time for Britain to go from the occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq, and we must be the people to tell them so. Now, I've just spoken at a meeting this morning of 1,000 people in central London near Tavistock Square, where that criminal act of mass murder took place almost exactly a year ago today. Someone wandered into the meeting. I can't imagine she was there on purpose. This is a sign, brothers and sisters. This is a sign, O ye of little faith. I spoke to a young woman after the meeting who said to me, we shouldn't have gone to Iraq, but now that we're there, we can't leave. The young woman was from South Korea. She kept saying, if we leave, what will happen to the Iraqis? I told her there's two things I have to say to you. Nobody, not you from South Korea, not the puppet regime in Baghdad, nobody has the right to demand that our country continues to occupy somebody else's country. Nobody has the right to demand that. And the second point, which is more important, has been adduced by all three speakers already. I merely underscore it. Iraq is not a nation of savages, barbarians who come from the dark side of the moon. The Iraqis had the biggest library the world had ever seen when my ancestors were painting their faces blue and living in the forest. Iraq was the country where algebra was invented, where the concept of the number zero was first discovered, where the alphabet was first written down, where paper was first used as a medium of communication. Iraq was the place where laws were first codified. The Iraqis are a highly sophisticated, highly politicized people. They do not need the brain of Texas, George W. Bush, to tell them how to rebuild their country. We have only one choice to make, and it's the one choice which any occupying people have to make. We have to decide whether we want our country to go around the world occupying other people's countries and stealing their wealth. Incidentally, I see in the same Sunday Times this morning that Stephen Byers, the former Blairite cabinet minister, has just taken a new job as an oil trader in Iraq. That was my job, we were told by the British media over the last few years. Now it's Stephen Byers' job, taking a job as an oil trader in Iraq. The only choice we have to make is this. You see, they say, well, the Iraqis might, if we withdraw, be ruled by Shiite mullahs or ayatollahs, or they might be ruled by Sunni holy men, or they might be ruled again by Arab nationalists. I say to the British media, get used to this. It's none of your business who rules Iraq. None of your business. Your only business is to decide whether or not we end this ignoble road which Mr. Blair, who is the real delusionist, Mr. Blair, who is the man who has really got the false sense of his place in the world. It's time to go for Britain in Iraq. It's time to go for Tony Blair as the Prime Minister of Britain. We can achieve a double whammy in Manchester on the 23rd of September. Be there. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you you very much indeed, George. Right, we've now got about 10 minutes for people to make questions and contributions. When you've made your contributions, then I'll ask each panellist if they want to make some final points. Where is the steward with the microphone? Yeah? Okay, right, I see you. Who would like to go first? Anyone? Yeah? Gentleman over there. Can you keep your hand up until the microphone... Oh, yeah. Wait until it comes. All right, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't know about contributions because I'm not working. But just to comment on what you said about your point, all what you said, I agree totally 100% what you're saying. It is an occupying force in Iraq and all over. But isn't it possible, justified to say that, you know, George Bush and Tony Blair do know what they're doing? The only reason why they're going there is the resources, you know, because the fact of the matter is even in the time of Prophet Muhammad, the Quraysh, they had the saying, it is better to oppress than be oppressed, you know. So the fact of the matter is, I believe personally, it's like you said, we have to look at all different angles. You know, like when you see the American troops, I agree with what you're saying like that, but when it came to Vietnam, you know, way back in Vietnam, the only reason why the Americans pulled out was because the American people actually saw the horrific and tragedies what the American troops did. But the fact of the matter is the actual media now that's hiding the facts, these very facts about the horrific atrocities and the crimes that they're doing. You know, so it's honoured.
Thank you very much. Who's next? Who would like to? Yep, gentleman there. You keep your hand up until the microphone comes. And then afterwards it'll be the lady over there.
Thank you. Just a very quick observation. Obviously, all you guys read the respected tabloids and respected broadsheet papers, and we don't necessarily take every word they say. Whose door do we lay the blame as far as the daily sectarian violence which is taking place in Iraq these days? Do we go by what you say, sorry, I didn't catch your name, author, in terms of the Americans do the work and obviously blame the Sunnis and the Shiites and saying there's a kind of violence between the two? Or do we just accept what the media is saying? I mean, is there any truth or is this all myth? If it is true, then how do we explain that when, George, you say they are a bunch of people who are very clever and not barbaric? Or is this the kind of result of what the Americans instigated in the first place? I think this is what we see every day, and this is what our people who on the other side who are pro-war definitely put back in our faces. Look, these guys are fighting among themselves. We've got nothing to do with it. Or there's something which is not seen as far as we're concerned. So that's okay.
Thank you very much. There was a lady. Yeah, can you keep your hand up until the stewards come over?
Well, saying that Britain should not, nobody should tell Britain whether or not they should keep their troops in Iraq, and it's a matter for the British, you're suggesting. Well, I believe if you went there in the first place, and the situation is so chaotic, you did not guard the borders, so the country has been flooded by foreign terrorists who are massacring far more Iraqi civilians than any of the Americans or British are doing. 30,000 Iraqi civilians have been killed by the terrorists. The fact is that because you've gone in there, it is your obligation, your duty, to listen to what the Iraqi government has to say, and if they say that they are not prepared now for the coalition forces to leave, then you have to stay there and try to help the country to reconstruct itself, to try and defeat the terrorism, and to clear this terrible chaotic situation. And you know, we cannot blame America and Britain also for everything. The fact is that other countries, other forces, ideologies have been taking a very bad, divisive role. And Al-Qaeda in Iraq had certainly have as much to blame as anyone else. And when in these anti-war, Stop the War coalition, they say that the resistance should be supported. Well, there may be people who are genuinely resisting American occupation, but there also much of what gets called the resistance is in fact terrorists who are anti-Iraqi, and they are attacking Islam and Muslims in Iraq and Islamic holy places.
Thanks. Right, who would like to go next? Gentleman here. Where? Okay, and then a woman there afterwards. Man here.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you for doing so marvelous job. May Allah bless you all and reward you for the good deeds you do. You see, I consider that besides the British and American, first of all, I'd like to congratulate Honorable George Galloway for taking his stand against the United States Senate. I've watched him very well, and my thinking is that not only British and American, but the part and parcel of this atrocity, the United Nations itself. And they're not doing anything. It's a tool for the Western countries, especially Britain, and I would like George Galloway to take a stand against the United Nations. In 1997, when there was an election, and before the Labour came along, you see, all the MPs came to the mosque, and I did ask whether the United Nations is a democratic institution, or just the five superpower countries are using their muscle to flex this muscle wherever it suits them. And you know that what Churchill said, the politician says one thing, because he thinks different thing, and he does something else. You see? And they didn't answer me, but I said because I hope that it doesn't die like a League of Nations. And they just caught on that and said, oh, we're sorry if it dies like a League of Nations. So I am asking all of you to say something about what is United Nations, you know, and you should take up the United Nations as well, especially George Galloway, because he has got a good stamina to fight all these people.
Thank you very much. There's a lady there. Just if you could put your hand up again, lady you indicated. Yeah, the lady there, that's it.
Well, I agree with the panels that Iraq was much better country under Saddam Hussein than what it is under America and Britain. The only reason they destroyed Iraq because it was the most highly developed country in amongst all the Arab countries. Because my family members, my brother-in-law and friend of family, they visited Iraq under Saddam Hussein. And that's how I know that they have Israel and America and some of the Arab even countries, they couldn't tolerate Iraq being so highly developed. But Israel is behind all this what's going on. They went and destroyed Iraq. Iraqi Saddam Hussein was supporting Palestinians, and I came to know that this is what Israelis couldn't tolerate. And also they didn't want Iraq. Everyone was feeling threat from Iraq, mainly Israel, because nobody else had the guts to stand up to any of the other countries except Saddam Hussein.
Thank you very much. Right, we're now running very short of time. We've been asked to finish in 5 minutes, so I'd like to ask our panel just to make their final concluding remarks in reverse order. George.
Well, I'll deal only with one because the others are more appropriately dealt with by our two Iraqi panelists. And it's the one about the way in which the Vietnam War ended. I just make a slight correction to what the brother said from the floor. The war in Vietnam ended and was broken between the hammer of the Vietnamese people's resistance and the anvil of international solidarity and anti-war feeling. It was not ended just because the Americans began to see how horrific it was. Indeed, it was only possible to begin to see that because the Vietnamese people, as a united people, were determined to resist the foreign occupation of their country. And notwithstanding what was said, and I disagreed with every word that was said from the lady on my right. The Iraqi people have made it clear, Sunni and Shiite, whether they're in the fighting resistance or in the passive resistance, that they will not accept the foreign occupation of their country. Mr. Blair said on the Andrew Marr show a month or two ago, and I'm quoting him, that he was shocked by the ferocity of the resistance of the people of Iraq to occupation. Well, he has no reason to be shocked, because I personally told him, man to man, face to face, just me and him, standing in the library corridor of the House of Commons. I told him every single thing that has happened would happen. And I told them the Iraqis will fight you with their teeth if necessary, and for as long as is necessary, until they've driven you from their country. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Thank you very much, George. Lindsay German.
I mean, I think the important thing about, somebody said, do they know what they're doing? I'm sure they think they know what they're doing when they go into these countries. They do want the resources, they do want the strategic control of the region, they do want the power in those places, but they always underestimate the resistance there and the resistance here. They always think they can just use their wealth and their power and their weapons and their money to be able to do these things, and they don't understand that the Iraqis from day one said no, and that the people in Britain from day one said no. And they are being caught between these two great forces, sometimes of opinion, sometimes in Iraq, military resistance, but always the people who are saying, we're not going to put up with it. And the amazing thing is that you find the level of opposition that still continues, and continues to further wars in Iran or anywhere else. So I think the important thing for us is to continue to build that level of opposition and to make sure that we do keep campaigning. The biggest weapon that Tony Blair has is he thinks people will forget. He thinks they'll go and watch the football, or they'll watch the television, or they'll go off and do something else, and they won't think about what has happened and what is still going on every day. We have to remember not to forget, not just not to forget, but to organise to make sure everybody else doesn't forget either, and be there on the 23rd of September.
I'll just to confirm that never believe that terrorists are fighting on behalf of Iraqi people. Never believe that Al-Qaeda fighting on behalf of Iraqi people. The real resistance in Iraq, the national Iraqi resistance is Iraqi resistance, and it is fighting to clear Iraq from the dirt called occupation, which is killing us daily. And anyone who read one or few pages of Iraqi history would have realized that the Iraqis will never accept occupation. The only terrorists we have in Iraq at the moment is the occupation forces. 12 out of 14 Iraqi main cities were bombarded by the American and the British air. So the occupation is the main terrorist. We get rid of it, we finish with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anas.
I have to say that I'm extremely saddened by the sisters' total lack of understanding and appreciation of not only Iraq, but of human nature. You occupy a country, you will be fought back. That is something that's, if each and any one of us was cornered, was brutalized, was dehumanized, saw with his own eyes his loved ones raped, killed, burnt, the home for which he has no home building insurance or content insurance as we do, confiscated, demolished, turned into rubble. Believe me, that person, even if it was you or I, would fight back even with our lives in order to reclaim our humanity. And that is what is going on. In my very brief presentation, I asked the question, why is it that now, whilst we have car bombs on a daily basis, we never did 2.5 years ago? Why is it that now, every day, we have dozens of suicide bombings 3.5 years ago we never did? Why is it that whilst for centuries. Sunnis and Shias, Arabs and Kurds and Turkmens lived side by side and created the country that Haifa talked about. The civilization that became one of the beacons of the Arab and Muslim world. Why is it that those people never fought each other, never stole land from each other? The timing is of essence, because 3.5 years ago there was an illegal and immoral occupation that happened. And when you say, and once again I am saddened that you belittle the resistance that is happening, and as George said, the active and the passive resistance going on inside Iraq, which is really a beacon of hope for all mankind, all those oppressed, all those dealing with occupying forces, whether they be corporate, military or political. I am extremely saddened that you claim and you believe or you buy into the lie that those are foreigners flooding Iraqi's borders. I tell you which foreigners are flooding Iraqi borders. They are the Americans, the British and others. And finally, just to reiterate something that George Galloway said regarding Vietnam, it is what we do here that is vital to what happens in Iraq. I recall when, more than a year ago, when the spokesman for the military, the American military, stood and said, there is nothing happening in Fallujah. Everything's fine, everything's under control. When someone said, well, actually, Al Jazeera TV are showing pictures of people being killed every single day. What was his response? Switch the channel. It's when we fail to see, it's when we fail to follow, when we fail to understand what's going on, that we forget. We must never, ever forget.
Many thanks, Anas, and a big thank you to all our speakers and